now we're getting to this more mature stage where it's more competitive. The prices are higher, but then the competition comes in, drives it down. So it becomes important to know, okay, what are we walking into? And I think that was like, okay, well, we need some more tools. Everyone knows that business decisions are best informed by good data. But when you're a small startup, good data is hard to come by, especially if your market is in its early stages of development. Enter the data brokers. You can just buy data about your market and you'll be on your way to startup success. Because I'm sure all the data you buy will be super accurate, right? Let's fire up the spreadsheets and talk about how buying data can help and hurt your startup. Hello, folks. Startup Different. Brothers Dave and Chris Sigurdsson, brother entrepreneurs. Chris, hello. Welcome to the show. Good to see you again. Today, we're talking about marketing data and whether or not you should buy it. And this is probably interesting because I think people, part of this is actually going to be like sort of an uncovering of what does it look like to purchase data, because a lot of time you hear about like Google's like selling your data and like whatever this company, or like your telecoms, like definitely selling your data. Like there's a lot of this happening. What does it actually look like functionally? And
I think this is like the moment your like little startup is like, oh, shucks. We just don't have data. We'll just buy it. I wish we had data, but we didn't think of it at the beginning. So let's just see if we can buy some.
It's interesting. In the first 2 episodes of this series, I really think that a lot of the data conversation has been like the pursuit of data, like just to find it.
Yeah.
It's hard to get, it's hard to make it. So can you buy it? This is option 3, and you will go down this road because it has some practical implications. And it kind of varies on a department basis as to like how useful the data is and what it's for. But this is an option, and it actually does have some merit in some cases and less in others. And it's kind of complicated. I think about, we had a bunch of systems, for instance, right, that helped our sales team. In terms of like getting data and having a better shot on any given sales engagement. Like we used to use this thing called GovSpend, for example. Shout out to the good folks at GovSpend. They're actually very helpful. And basically, it aggregated all of the data around public contracts in basically the entire United States. Lesser except Canada. So
like, where did they get that data from though? Like how did they get all that data?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I would look at it as predominantly being in like an aggregator system. The data's out there in various formats. It's on, but for instance, we talked a few times in previous episodes about like RFPs and like the request for proposal process. This is a very public process most of the time. Surprisingly, even for large companies, sometimes, even though they're not public entities, sometimes they'll post like awards online and how much it was for, and here's the contract. But if they're a public entity, which was a lot of who we did business with, that data is available online. The thing is, it would be really, really annoying for one individual person to go out and figure all this out. Like go on every single like a buyer department website, or purchasing department, I should say, at a major institution, and try to go through all the contracts and find the ones that are relevant to you and how much they're paying and that kind of stuff. I should mention federal entities, Government of Canada has actually a list of all the vendors it does business with and all of the contracts they have, and you can see them. And there's an equivalent kind of in the United States. But the idea is like, this was a helpful tool because we could basically pop into the system. We would put in competitor name. So let's just call them Mobile Safety Company. And we would punch it in there and we would see every single public contract in the United States with that product. It's pretty effective. And now you would get a lot of noise. You had to like clean up the search. You get better at it, that kind of thing. But the long and short of it is we could go into sales engagements, understanding what the customer was already paying. Especially if it was a renewal, we could understand that the price was going to be probably like plus somewhere within 0 to plus 10% of that current price. People usually put the price up by 10% about every year. Yeah. So it was kind of one of those things where, hey, great. Particularly if we were trying to attack an important, like entrenched sort of position that a competitor had, we could go in knowing, okay, well, and you say this too, or you still do, that we could be 10 times better, 10 times the price. We actually would have this data, be able to go in, 10 times less expensive. We're going to be 10 times more. We're going to convince them, be 10 times less the price. and go in and really move the needle with that customer, you know?
Did it give you like when the contracts ended? Like, so
Yeah,
that
we
you,
would know the turnover period. I mean, a lot of that was based on their fiscal, just because of so like that is whenever their fiscal year would turn over, which usually was July. But we would definitely have a sense of, yeah, when should we be reaching out to these customers? We had an ongoing sort of live spreadsheet that was all the contracts, all the customers we were targeting, the vendors they were currently with, the average spend they had, the time of expiry, and then we just had, subtract 3 months from contract renewal date. Probably would actually be more like 6 months,
6 months?
maybe
Yeah.
maybe even
Yeah.
more, to be honest, depending on how important the client was. I mean, we would nurture some leads for years,
Wow.
right? It just takes time in that market. We'd have lots of leads for a reason, because some of them are going to close 2 years later, some are going to close 3 months later. That's how it goes. But at least we could know going to those. And this, it's I should say, you want to create a more confident sales rep. That's going to do it, because they're going to go into that call going, hey, I'm not going to look like an idiot when I put the price out there. In fact, I'm going to look really appealing to them. Even if they aren't going to go ahead with me, I'm not going to have a bad call. They're not going to suddenly drop. Well, we're not really interested in this. Don't have the money for it. See you later. You're going to know that they have the money for it.
Kind of just makes it so like, the customer understands that you kind of know your market. You're not like, I feel like when we first started our business and we started to see some other competitors in the space, like we were probably leaving money on the table. Like we were probably selling too inexpensively, to the point where even like some customer would be like, it's too cheap. There must be something wrong with this, right? Because you don't really want to be way cheaper than your customers, especially when it's a little bit more of a mature product. Unless, you're trying to knock out or something.
I remember
like
we had a meeting with one prospective customer, and I had been courting them for years. And it was just this frustrating revolving door of different departments and people that I was talking to. And so I get the in-person meeting. Finally, I go there. I actually didn't end up closing it on this, which is super annoying. I ended up closing it a year later with a different stakeholder anyway. But I was in the committee meeting and I did the pitch, and they saw the price and it was like 10 grand or something. Okay, which is like a lot, but not really at all for some of these organizations. And they said, man, just printing the brochures about campus safety is way more than 10 grand. We should just do this with that budget. Somebody said this to my face in the meeting room, and I'm like, yeah, you should. And we didn't get the deal, because that was, they were just so frustratingly bureaucratic. We got it later. But it's interesting because we were leaving a lot of money on the table. We could have charged, I think, 4 times more. No doubter. We could have charged 40 grand, and I think they would have been totally fine.
And at what stage in our development did you guys decide that, like, did GovSpend like cold call you guys and be like, hey, we can give you all this data about your market?
I think we did actually get a cold call from them, a cold call or cold email. Hey, they work sometimes. And I was like, hey, this is actually kind of interesting, because you're always looking at a way to move the needle forward. And
boy, that would have been helpful to have that like years earlier, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Like, when in our development of our company did that happen? Like, was that like halfway through?
There's kind of around this time, I feel like, in your organization, where your product starts maturing and the competitors start to consolidate and the market's tighter. It's harder to win deals.
Yeah.
And because there's like a main core of competitors that are on almost every call, the market's really well educated on them. So it's the differentiation is there, but it's hard to emphasize. Like, it's tougher. Like, you might not win every deal. Like, there's kind of a phase where everyone's kind of, we're crossing that chasm, we're rolling, and you're just closing deals. Now we're getting to this more mature stage where it's more competitive. The prices are higher, but then the competition comes in, drives it down. So it becomes important to know, okay, what are we walking into? And I think that was like, okay, well, we need some more tools. We need more tools. We needed more data. And this kind of coming back to the crux of the episode here, should you buy the data? This seemed like a clear example of an efficient way to get a lot of data that was largely accurate. And they actually promised a certain level of accuracy as part of the contract with us, which was something, I think it was like 90% accuracy or something like that, which I was willing to tolerate. I was like, that's pretty good.
Pretty good, I guess.
Right?
Yeah.
So because you got to understand, some of the data that was on these purchasers' websites, the data they could post it in like a portal. There's this thing called I can't remember. I want to say SciQuest, but I don't think that's right. There was a really weird name portal thing, or Jagger, maybe. Anyway, it's a weird name, but it was this purchasing portal that was starting to do really well. I think it's probably doing really, really well now. But if they're going to post it online, it'd be on this thing. So we would watch that, of course. But then a lot of cases, I mean, in some cases, they would fax you to tell you that you won. So the data quality was really low. And if they were posting it online, it'd be buried 3 or 4 levels deep, and it's a PDF, and it's an image on the PDF. So it's not even like readable or searchable. So the fact that this tool existed to aggregate a lot of this, like, frankly, terrible data into a way that we could digest was really appealing, because it was like, wow, this is so efficient. And for the value we got out of it, it was actually pretty affordable. It was expensive-ish, so, actually not bad, but it was.
So you could have done it yourself, but you just never would have had that. Like, it would have taken you forever, and you never would have had that like 30,000 foot view of what that market.
Yeah, like I would say, right? Generally, buying data is complicated. The best data you're going to get is the data you find yourself most of the time. We knew this data existed, but we didn't have an aggregator. We didn't have an efficient way of going in and getting it. Right. This gave us that path, for sure.
Did you guys ever buy any data that was like where it was not useful, where it was like highly suspect, where it
for sure. So I think there's a few other things. So I mean, I would get at least once a day, possibly more, and I think you did too, kind of these emails and calls from people who are just like, I insert market you're in, square bracket variable, insert market you're in. We're selling a list of the top 20,000 professionals in public safety, in healthcare safety, in whatever. And it was, I remember one time I had a sales rep. Hi, it's Gabe. He's going to appear around me after I say this. Anyway, it's okay, Gabe. This isn't your fault. You thought it was a good idea. I thought, hey, let's try. So he suggested, why don't we buy one of these lists and see how it goes? So we bought the list, and it was terrible. Once we actually started emailing them, it was more. I think it was like 80% of them were no inbox.
Really? Like they were moved on, or they were just.
It depends. Like most of the time, it's just like failed to deliver. If this is not a person,
that's too bad.
So like there's a really bad end of the spectrum too. And there's kind of you need to evaluate these options. Later on, we would use Zoom Info a lot. And actually, I think Bill Price, who was the CFO of Rave, was also the CFO at Zoom Info for a while. It was kind of one of our first conversations with them. It was like, yeah, sometimes we use this tool. It's kind of creepy, but we can get all the data about people. It's called Zoom Info. He's like, yes, I was the CFO of that software company. Yeah. I was like, yeah, it's a great system. I love it. But I remember we would use that. That was really helpful because that would provide reasonably very accurate data. I think they promised 90%, and I think they mostly delivered on that. I can't remember, but 90% accuracy on, and it would pull a lot of data about you. Yeah. And it would actually be pretty helpful. And not just about you, but of course, about your market and the people you're trying to target. And so for our sales reps who are looking to prospect the market, it became a really effective tool to kind of quickly compile big lists of people we could reach out to. You can't exactly like easily export from Zoom Info, at least not that I'm aware of, and I don't want to talk too much for a different software product, but you export the big list and then email them all. It was more still a process of validating a little bit, but it definitely gave you a huge head start.
Yeah.
And this was in comparison to, just for what it's worth, was in comparison to our reps going out to every single prospective website. So universities and colleges are a good example because they had a list of all the faculty and staff somewhere, because people at the university and college would need to reach those people for totally legitimate reasons. So we could go in and find, director of emergency management, emergency coordinator, emergency director, whatever, chief of police, assistant chief of police, whatever, and we could find those people and we could validate that information and reach out to them too. So we did that sometimes as well as Zoom Info.
Mm-hmm. Going back to some of those like bad lists where you were getting all the, I think I'm on some of them because like you and I, we exited about a little over a year, 13 months ago, approximately. And I get like weekly calls on my cell phone because I must be on like the list of like CTOs of SaaS companies or something like that.
Top 10,000 bootstrapped SaaS CEOs.
Yeah.
Who did it differently.
I get a call, I answer, and I'm just cringing, hoping that it's not a spam call. And of course it is. And they start talking and they don't let you get a word in edgewise until they're like, do you think I can book a meeting with you now to tell you about our product next week? And it's like, and I have to say, well, I'm actually like, I'm not doing that anymore.
You're very nice about it.
Yeah, I think most people are probably just hang up. But
well, you don't necessarily hang up, but I do interrupt them.
Do you? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to hear their whole pitch, and they don't want to waste their breath on me if I got nothing to offer. This is that's a salesperson doing a nice thing for another salesperson.
I can tell you that when they call me and I tell them, I say, unfortunately, I've exited for our startup, and I'm not working right now. I'm not doing that anymore. They're like, "Oh, congratulations. I won't bother you, but thanks for your time.
Nice.
Have a great day." So usually they're actually kind of nice when I tell them
so
that they're
is
wasting their
that
time.
what you're in it for? You just
me.
want to have a nice little chit chat with
Yeah,
someone?
I don't mind.
Hi.
Yeah, but that's why I don't hang up on them, because maybe they'll be nice
It's
to me
nice.
at the
I
end.
appreciate you as a sales rep. I appreciate you not hanging up on them, and I really try not to hang up on people either. I only do that if it's like really bad. They're the ones who they're just fighting through their script, even though you're like, you have a 0% chance of getting this deal. Like, I will not do this.
So this is what makes me wonder, like a lot of these data lists, like that first list you were talking about where it was like 80%, they must not be doing any type of review of those lists. No. Like they must be just sort of like,
it's almost a scam.
Really? Yeah.
Is the way I think it is a scam, to be honest. I think what they do is they try to extrapolate what the email addresses, for instance, would be based on like a naming convention, but that's not always accurate. Like founders, for instance, will tend to have a slightly different email address than other people at the company, so that it's not easy to get to them directly. I mean, like try look up a CEO name at a company and try to email them based on the naming convention of another employee there. You're not going to get them.
By the way, one tip for founders that are preparing to exit or exiting, get a new phone number. Yours truly thought it would be a great idea to keep my phone number, just, so whatever.
I'll tell you, I'll give you a trick. Change your voicemail to be like, I don't work there anymore. That's what I did for a while.
Yeah, that's what Dave did. Yeah, that was pretty good.
It worked great because they wouldn't leave any more voicemails and they'd stop calling me. I don't even have to say anything anymore.
I think my voicemail is just the person at number is not available now. Yeah, I think
that's how I also know you're not a salesperson. You have to have a good voicemail. When they call you, they got to know that they're calling the right person.
Right on. So, talking about accuracy and that sort of stuff. Obviously we did some research for this episode. So I wanted to kind of like look about like, what is it with like buying the data? What is like the actual like accuracy levels of this stuff? I thought one of these stats was really interesting. So a lot of data that they're demographic data they're trying to collect, they're trying to figure out gender. Okay. Obviously in, binary gender studies, but this article on HBR where they were talking about buying consumer data, tread carefully. They actually found that only 42.5% was accurate in the gender of the data that was purchased, which when you think it's a 50-50 shot, they were worse than randomly guessing. They were worse at just like picking one, male, female, like
just totally, it's like, it's worse than just guessing.
Basically. Yeah, exactly. So I think, that's something to keep in mind, is that some of this stuff is just, who knows what you're getting, and I think we experienced that firsthand. So the other piece that I really liked from this article that where they said that the accuracy was actually much better was on the narrowest of parameters. So the most specific attributes of people tended to be the most accurate. Okay. So like, for instance, in North America, people like following sports. So if you're trying to target, your Google AdWords based on people that are into sports, that's probably not going to be that accurate because it's too broad, or males versus females. That's also very broad. So it's better to be like super specific on what you're going to segment onto. And then that way it's much more cost effective as well. So you're not wasting your money on, people who are into sports, because, it just kind of gets everybody and isn't targeting the people.
That kind of makes me think of, when you run ads, right, on certain social platforms or even Google ads or whatever, when you go to target those ads, it will ask you about your audience. And if you do a very broad audience, it's a really great way to explode your spend and provide very little tangible results, because you're just too broad. You need to focus on this is easy, on your target market. But that's what that kind of reminds me of. Like, I would never buy a really general list, because that's not actually going to help me with my business. And sometimes this is the other thing too. We're a little bit off path here, but if you're validating like a business idea or something like that, and you're like, who's going to buy this? And you're like, everyone? That's bad. Like, who in everyone is going to actually purchase this and why, right? You need to understand that. And I feel like this is where going out and when you're trying to buy the data, you better know exactly what you're looking for. Like have a really clear picture. Like for us, we would delineate on like title, on obviously, because that was like a very easy way to do it. Like the type of organization, I don't know, even some cases we could do years that they were there. Our market tended to be predominantly male. That's just the way it seemed to be for some reason. So, we didn't care that much about some of these other data points, but we had a good handful of 10, 15 different things that we knew. Sometimes we would even do, for instance, if they were like, how long had they been at the organization? So this is something that Zoom Info is really good at, because we could see how long they'd been there. And if they were a new chief of police, we knew they were more likely to try new ideas and Hello Safety app.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So I would make sure I loved going after new chiefs.
Huh.
I don't know. It's funny. I don't have a easy piece of data in front of me to say, we were 25% more successful or something, but we were we were definitely anecdotally more successful with new chiefs. As like a straight cold email or cold call.
Yeah. So there's another HBR article that I read while researching this episode. Yeah,
two in one episode. It's a twofer.
This one was good. Actually, I really enjoyed it. It's why buy marketing data is like buying a used car. Have you ever bought a used car?
I've never bought a used car. I'm not a big car guy though. I mean, is it similar as a new car or what?
No, it's a completely different experience. Do you remember my?
You bought a Tesla. You didn't even go into the dealership.
Well, no. But think about my first car that I ever bought. What was that?
1984 Pontiac Fiero.
Right.
Oh yes, I got the year.
yeah, that's pretty good. But yeah, that was a bit of a mystery, right? Like it had a fiberglass body and looked really shiny and cool and stuff like that.
So
under
cool.
the hood, it had a few issues. It became known as the F car.
not
fun.
Sure. Yeah, not fun. The word was
another
not
F
fun.
word.
Yeah.
So the idea is it's high variability. You don't really know what you're getting, right? From the outside, looks like a good list. You're going to spend the money, you're going to get the data. Everything's going to be great. And then you pop the hood after you now own said list, and you find out that 80% are bounce backs, things like that. So so that was one of the big points of this article, was that the vendors selling the data, there's a tremendous variability. Some can be really good and some can be really terrible.
That's interesting. When I think about it, going back, so before we had Zoom Info, we had a year where I was like, we need some kind of data to support the prospecting effort. So that is, targeting people. So before we had Zoom Info, I went out and I found this service that was called, I think it was called like Safety Source or something. But what it was is there was this company that just had a bunch of people. They would do these blitzes all throughout the year, like these call blitzes, and I guess probably looking up on websites. And they would call all the chiefs of police, like municipal or campus or whatever. They would call the like EMS people, the fire people, whatever, and they would validate all the contact information at those agencies. And then they basically, I think in their early days, they sold like a big book, like a yellow pages, like here a phone book that you could actually get at. And I remember ticking the box, being like, I do not want the physical copy of this list, but then getting the rest of that data, and their service was incredibly manual. This was not an AI. This was not a script scraping.
Did that mean accurate though? Like, did that mean that
it was pretty good? It was actually pretty good, and it wasn't that expensive either. But they just the data would potentially be pretty stagnant though, right? So if they make the phone call on a Wednesday and they get all the data, and then on the Friday the chief is let go, they're not going to call that agency for another year. Right. So the data was okay. Probably more in the 70-75% range. And there was also just we were paying for a lot of like other people that we didn't care about. It was kind of like all in, so we could be more effective with our spend on Zoom Info. But it was interesting because I still think though that was like what we were doing before, which was like buying those random lists and having them totally suck. This was a huge quantum leap forward. And it was because they really did focus on our space and had a process for it. So there is a lot of variability, depending on which vendor you work with for sort of like the data purchase.
Yeah. So the other piece that was in this great article I read, they were talking about the data on individual records. So what they did was they actually got 10 like volunteers. So it's a small sample set. So take
Okay.
that with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
But they had these 10 volunteers that said, here's what we want to do. We want to go into these databases, data sets, and look you up, and then compare the data that they have on you to what is actually correct. So we want to get like the accuracy level. So on these 10 people, they went and looked them up, and they said that actually there were very few errors, okay, across the different providers that they had picked. So the cell
Cool.
phone numbers, the email addresses, all that sort of stuff.
So the variability was low.
The
Okay.
variability was low, okay?
Okay.
But what was really interesting is that the coverage, okay? So of those 10 people, 9 of them were in all of those data sets,
Huh.
okay? But one person wasn't in any of them.
It's a ghost.
Yeah, like that person must have figured out a way to just submarine themselves.
That almost sounds,
Out
that
of
sounds
this,
intentional. Like that
Yeah,
they were like, I
yeah.
feel like it's so hard to avoid being known on the
So,
internet.
but I think that's what you need to understand, though, is you might have like blind spots. You might have like you're just missing the key person at an organization. So you have to look at those data sets and say like, hey, yeah, if they've got the data, it's probably reasonably accurate. But they might also not have anything on the person I actually would need to be trying to work with to push a safety app forward at an institution. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things to keep in the back of your mind as you're doing your
It,
work and you're trying to find prospective clients is, yeah, make sure that they're not in the blind spot.
it might be kind of like a last mile sort of issue where like you might get 20 or excuse me, like 90% of what you're looking for through a purchase or a software license with one of these other platforms that provides this data. But that last 10% you probably still have to go out and get, and you still have to validate that 90% with your team anyway.
Yeah.
So there's not that many shortcuts. There are some, like that definitely helps. Like some of these things are really good. I should say too, even in GovSpend, that contract data, that wasn't always perfect either.
Yeah.
Like so there's something to be said here about that. So
Yeah.
I can definitely get that it was surprisingly spotty.
So if we kind of summarize this, kind of some takeaways from this conversation, like you don't really know what you're getting when you're going out and you're buying a data set, when you're talking to a data broker. High variability, they could be good, they could be not so good. The data generally, if it's in there, I think you should feel fairly good that it's accurate based on what I've read and the data that I've seen. But be aware. There might be people just completely missing from it, but what data you do get hopefully is pretty accurate. I think the important piece is use it as like a starting point. Always curate the data because you don't want to look silly. We were doing enterprise sales. We weren't selling low cost items. These were fairly big purchases in the grand scheme of things. So curate everything before you actually try and reach out to anybody. And then, yeah, look very carefully at the data sources. We had, I think if you were to like think of the different data sources that we were using, the one that was the best, was it the GovSpend one, because it was all coming from public sources?
Yeah.
Is that
It
the
was
way?
reasonably, it was pretty reliable. There's
Yeah.
also what you're going to get in Zoom info is people turn over, they leave organizations, they retire, they unfortunately they pass away sometimes, like things change.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're talking about like contracts, like they are around for eternity.
Yeah, like that happened on that
happened.
date and time, and that's
Yep.
kind of static. Whereas, people who the current person is at a prospective client, that can change pretty quickly. Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Good point.
So like if you were to ask me, would I do it the same way? Like probably, yeah. Like I think that having some of this data is better than having none, and it can really give you an advantage in the market. But it's definitely a complicated picture. It's
Mm-hmm.
not always going to get you the silver bullet. It's gonna help you move along to the next step. And the other thing too that tends to happen is just thinking about it more operationally. If you have a ton of data around some of this stuff, you have to really educate your sales staff on how to use it effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Some sales guys have a way of doing things, and they, it doesn't matter how many tools you put in front of us, they're not going to do it differently. And I think one thing to be really cognizant of, okay, like if you're going to make the investment in this, you need to make it part of your culture. That okay, you're going to evaluate a sales lead, or you're going to do a new email list if you're like an SDR or BDR or whatever, or you're gonna go into a sales call. Like you better use GovSpend before you go on that call, or I'm gonna be really mad at you. Like if you just make pricing that is just kind of the seat of your pants, or like if you want to charge more because you think you can and you've got reasons for this, I still want you to know what they're paying now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you need to be ready for that. You know?
Does it, just out of curiosity, do you feel, I kind of feel a little icky talking about this because like I hate that in some way we're contributing to the demand for data and all the data collection that goes on, that, you know, like if nobody wanted to buy data for these purposes, nobody would be collecting it, and maybe data privacy wouldn't be such a big deal. But you know,
I do feel it feels weird. I think morally, I one of the questions I would always ask, because you get a demo from these platforms, I'd always ask, how do you get the data? Yeah. And I can tell you that some I was more comfortable with and some less so. So as an example, there's the one company that called out, they asked for it and they got it. Okay, that's fine. That seems totally legit. On the other hand, I know that, for instance, ZoomInfo is a freemium platform. And the way you can get certain free data is you add your, there's a little widget, I think for Chrome, or maybe even part of your G Suite, I can't remember, but it's like something in your email. So yeah, you can get that information, and you can even like look somebody up right when you're in your email. The trade-off is they're reading your email information and selling it. That's how the freemium works.
Yeah.
That's a little gross. That one, yikes. I don't like. Ugh. Yeah. So, you know, I agree with you. I think it's a little weird. That being said, this is part of the modern business landscape. Like you kind of got to do it.
Yeah, I do feel better with like the GovSpend stuff because I feel like that is public record anyways. So, you know.
That's aggregation of stuff that's already out there. Yeah. The ZoomInfo stuff feels a little weirder.
Yeah.
You know.
Oh, well. We'll go take a shower now.
Oh, well. Well, that works out for them. All right. Good luck. God bless. That Startup Different. We'll see you later. All right, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. That is actually the episode today. So that was Should You Buy Marketing Data? Next week will be the final episode of the series and in the season, which will be very fun. We'll have a guest on the show. Should be a really great discussion. We look forward to seeing you then. Until then, please rate the pod and, of course, follow us on social, and we will see you next week. Thanks for joining us. If you like what you heard, subscribe to and rate Startup Different in your favorite podcast app. If you want to see our radio faces, check us out on YouTube at Startup Different and look us up on social. We're probably there if you are. And lastly, do you want to feature your startup on the show? Reach out via our website, startupdifferent.com. See you next time.